Today I have a very special guest in the studio. Her name is Beth Hocking. She is a high-performing leadership coach. She is a career strategist and also a motivational speaker. I'm so happy to have you here today.
Oh, Nina, what a lovely introduction. Thanks for having me.
My first question to you is gonna be, all superheroes have an origin story, and I'm curious what yours is. Can you let us know a little bit of the story that brought you here today?
Well, I already love the language that you're using because superhero is absolutely something that I love to use with my clients as well. So thanks. I feel like that's like a nice compliment. I have spent 20 years in a corporate career in sales, in a job that I loved, and I was climbing the career ladder in. And I think when you climb, the higher you climb through corporate, the more male dominated it seems to be. And I found myself kind of pushing against that, I guess, that glass ceiling of, could I get any further? Was there limitations or barriers? Was it because I was a woman that I was, not kind of progressing through the ranks as quickly as I wanted to? And I think I had kind of a lot of these questions running through my mind, and conveniently, 2020 brought its magic gems to us, let's say this, because yes, obviously, COVID brought a lot of heartache and a lot of, super sad times to us. But, let's not forget there was also some positives that came out of COVID, and I think it's still something that we should look at. What was it that was positive for you amongst all the devastation? And for me, there was a positive of time. I was gifted some time back. So I stopped traveling the world. I was landlocked. I had some evenings free, and kind of got over the slump of drinking too much wine and baking too much banana bread, and realised actually I needed to do something a bit more proactive with this time that I had. And really kind of thought about what is it that I loved about my job, and if I couldn't go any further, what might that look like? And if I wanted to spend, hopefully another 25 years in the world of work, what did I want that to look like? So I think a lot of reflection time for me. I also turned 40 in lockdown, so it was a bit of a milestone birthday, and I think that kind of brings us a lot of reflections. And I thought about what I loved, and I just loved coaching and mentoring my teams. I'd always have fairly young teams, and I wanted to be the boss that I wish I'd had. When I was in my 20s and leading into my 30s, and that's who I set out to be. And actually I was like, what, if I can make an impact on the team that I had, could I make a bigger difference and a bigger impact out in the world if I took what I loved doing and my passion to support our young teams and the next generation? What could I take out into the world? And I recognised quite quickly that I wanted to support women. I wanted to make sure that we were well represented, and that women were really felt empowered to go for the next step in their careers and accelerate their careers. And we're not often taught how to do that or shown how to do that. And that's where I kind of felt like, actually, I feel like, here's my mission and here's my purpose, and to readdress that gender gap that I recognise that is in senior leadership I'm in the UK, but it's prevalent all over the world. So that is a very long answer to your initial question. I hope that helps.
100%. And I think it is a very beautiful mission to kind of drive more females into this world, empower them, make sure that they can have the career that they are dreaming of. And you have worked already with like over 100 women around these different topics. Is there like a common theme that you feel around women? Maybe also what is different between a career that's driven by a woman versus driven by a man?
Yeah, and I find that question hard to answer in terms of what's different from a man to a woman, because obviously I'm only coming from a female lens, right? So yes, I definitely see that there are some crossovers, and yes, what I'm talking about with women in particular are not necessarily women's issues, let's put it like that. However, for me, I felt very strongly drawn to support women in particular, because I did recognise that there was maybe more of this energy around lacking in self-confidence and lacking in self-belief and lacking in self-worth. And I'm not saying that men don't go through, these feelings or feeling a kind of lack in these scenarios, but for me, it was definitely around, I noticed it a lot in women. I noticed it in myself. I noticed it in the teams that I had supported and, brought up, through 20 years of corporate. So for me, there was much more around this element of self-belief and recognizing if we were worthy or not. And I think, there's plenty of statistics that I could kind of throw out at you, and I think the most famous one is the lean in, the Sheryl Sandberg quote, which is that men would happily go for jobs when they meet 60% of the criteria, and that women wait until they meet 100% of the criteria before they go to jobs. And by the way, side note, if you're waiting until you meet 100% of that criteria, you're already overqualified for that position. That is just a side note to kind of throw out there, in case that's helpful for anyone listening. But for me, the common themes definitely are kind of imposter syndrome, which comes from that lack mindset, that not understanding what they bring to the table. I think women are, you've used the word superheroes. I love this word as well, or having their superpowers. And I think women in particular are not very good at recognizing what their strengths are. And I think that we almost take it for granted. We kind of go, yeah, I'm good at that, or oh, I can do that standing on my head. Actually, let's recognize that these things that come easily to us are our strengths and are our superpowers. And I think we're so easy to kind of negate them or think, no, let's dismiss that or diminish it. But actually, these are the things that we should be grabbing hold of and going, no, I'm really good at this, and I can do this on a bigger scale, or I can do this, in a promoted role or for a bigger team, or however that looks like. So for me, it's about kind of not diminishing what our strengths are, and women come to me for all kinds of things, being stuck in their careers, not recognizing their strengths, not having clarity around what their next role is, things like we've talked about, the kind of the lack mentality, which also lead to not advocating for themselves, which means that they kind of stay stagnant, they don't progress to their next role, because let's face it, being passive isn't going to get you promoted. So it is kind of about, how do I stand up for myself? How do I say I'm unhappy? How do I say, I'm ready for the next step? And I think that women in particular are not as comfortable doing that as I have seen some men do. And I don't want to be that generalist of, yes, some women do that brilliantly and some men don't do it as well as others. So, for me, yes, there probably is a slight distinction. Can I say it happens to all genders and all people in all those genders? No, for sure no. But, the passion for me there is making sure that us women recognise that we have a voice and it's a value, and that we all need, the world needs to hear our voices. And I think that for me is something that's magical and powerful, that we have as women, that we can cultivate more.
There are so many interesting nuggets in here, and I want to dive in many of them during our conversation today. But the thing that you just ended on is the note of the voice. And I feel like many women struggle with really owning their voice, even knowing what their voice is saying in a sense, because we are so trained in listening to the wants and needs of others around us, that we sometimes forget to listen to our own voice. Is there anything that you like to work around the voice aspect, the getting heard, the getting the inner guidance piece even? Like, how do you work with clients around expressing their voice?
Yeah, thank you. I love this so much, because I think we hold ourselves back, and I wonder if it's about conditioning quite a lot. I don't know, if you were brought up with the same phrase around children should be seen and not heard. I don't know if that kind of translates across different countries, but certainly in the UK we were brought up not to have emotions, to be seen, to kind of be put all put together quite well, but not to have a voice, or not to have an opinion, or not to have a feeling. And I think when we're brought up like that, and certainly I was brought up to respect my elders and respect the more senior people amongst us. And I think when we take that conditioning and we put ourselves into a corporate environment, we're still having those voices in our minds, aren't we, about I respect the eldest person in the room, or the most senior voice in the room. Do I have to respect that if I don't believe that that's the case? And I think the world of work is changing ever so slightly, but how I love to work with my clients is to recognize, we've touched on, recognizing what your strengths are, but also to kind of recognize how amazing we are. And I would just want to put that into context, because the chances of you and I and anyone else being born, I don't know if you know the statistic, is 1 in 400 billion. So we are already incredible. Like, we've beaten all the odds to be alive and to be on this planet as we are today. And I think we don't quite recognise how incredible even that statistic is, let alone our journeys. And I think that everybody's experience and unique strengths give them their voice. Like, that is who they are, that's their superpower. And now it's how we choose to use that voice. And nobody else is you, right? Nobody else has had your lived experience. Nobody else has had your 20, 30, 40, 50 years on earth. Nobody else has got your qualifications, your credentials. You know, nobody else is you. So why wouldn't we want to hear your voice? Because you bring a unique standpoint. You bring your life's history and backstory and like just strength and all of those things that you possess that not one other person is exactly identical to you on this planet, which, you know, when we put things into context, wow, why aren't you speaking up? Because the world needs your voice and the world needs what you have to say, and you wouldn't be on this earth, and I truly believe that, if you didn't have a message to bring. And I think, you know, yes, there's two angles to this, which is one is the individual and how we confidently speak our voice and understand what we bring to the table and why it's of value and why someone would want to hear what we have to say. But there's also the secondary issue for me, which is the systemic one. So for me, it's about, you know, how can corporate environment encourage you to use that valuable voice? And you wouldn't be in a position of authority, of leadership, if you hadn't proved your worth, if you didn't bring something to the party, and if you didn't have something to say. So how can we, in that corporate environment, also be the best leaders that we possibly can to ensure that psychological safety, but also to ensure that everybody's voice is being heard and that everybody's unique strengths and skill sets, like we're all having an input, because actually we all need those different thought leaderships and thought diversity. Because if we were all yes people and we all just said yes to the most senior person at the table, then innovation would be down, or you know, anything that needed a little bit of you know, creativity or spark or passion or something, you know, from somebody else around the table, then we would lose all of that. And that's why, you know, for me, consciously as a leader around that corporate environment, I wanted to hear from the youngest person in the room. I wanted to hear from the TikTok generation. I wanted to hear from, you know, somebody who's got a different perspective than me, because, you know, we all need those fresh perspectives and that second pair of eyes and that sense check in a way. And that's what we're all here to bring to the party, is that we all have a unique voice and that we all need to recognise that we've got that strength and we've got that gift, and that everybody needs to hear what we have to say.
I think it takes a lot of... You need to be quite humble as a leader to make sure that those young voices are also heard. So I think there's definitely a responsibility on the leadership side. But I also remember when I was just starting out, I have an engineering background. So I was in a room with a lot of older men, and they were having very in-depth discussions about things. And I was very afraid to speak up, because I felt not that I had owned my place there yet, that I had the same understanding. But now looking back, I probably had a very unique perspective that none of them could bring to the table. So there was probably some value there if someone would have listened to me. And there were many who have. So I'm quite lucky in how that unfolded. But I also feel there is a combination between this voice piece and the confidence or kind of strength piece. Because oftentimes we feel like when things just come easy to us is that they don't really have value. So if there is a problem and I so clearly see the answer to it, then maybe it's not the right answer because no one else seems to see it. Like there's probably a more complicated way that things need to get done. Like, do you have any thoughts around that?
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. Sometimes we can dismiss it as being, you know, too obvious. You know, maybe it's like hiding in plain sight. And I think, you know, talking about our strengths, it's like if it is coming, you know, easily to us, oh, it can't possibly be that that's my strength, because we assume that other people have got the same strength, and we assume lots of things about other people or about ourselves that are not necessarily true. So we tell ourselves these stories that we buy into and that we believe. And, I'm sure you've heard the term like a limiting belief, and that is a kind of a coaching term, which is essentially a word for a story that we have believed for so long, that we just keep telling ourselves. And it's almost like that Henry Ford quote, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. And, we're almost like self-limiting ourselves by not believing that we have something unique to bring to the table. So I think for me, in terms of, you've hit the nail on the head, like the confidence to speak up and to listen to the voice inside, the whisper that's saying, actually I've got something to add here. Maybe it's almost like we could think about it as that imposter syndrome coming through. So the inner critic, or that critical inner voice that kind of stops us from speaking up because we think, we can't possibly add any value here, or what if I look stupid? And I think that there's an element of that as well. Like there's a fear side if we're not speaking up. So I think let's trust our instincts a little bit more. I think sometimes we as women, like that feminine energy, and men possess that too, but I think if we drop down into our intuition and listen to our kind of wisdom, inner knowing and inner wisdom, more than we listen to our inner critic and that kind of imposter syndrome, we recognize actually we do have some values here. And maybe it is so obvious, but it's so obvious that no one else is saying it out loud. So let's just throw it into the ring and see what happens. We don't live and die by the things that come out of our mouths, and we're never always going to get it right. And I think there's an element of perfectionism and wanting to own the room, own our story, and be perfect with it. And I think when we think about leadership, I think the best leaders are the people who go, hands up, I got it wrong, or I don't know the answer to this. And I think you talked about humility and coming with, that humble side of being a leader. And I think that is for me, that perfectly embodies, what a great leader can be, is let's drop the act of trying to be perfect. Let's drop the act of having to know everything. And, it gives permission to the other people in the room to have a voice in a psychologically safe space, and to go, okay, you know what, I'm just going to say what I'm thinking in case it's helpful. If it's not perfect, or if there's a judgment around it, I'm going to, feel okay with whatever happens. And, personally, I love equipping my clients with tools to handle that. So if there is a fear of judgment, and if they say something and somebody's like, makes a derogatory comment or says, don't be so stupid, I give my clients the tools to handle those things. Because, if we think about it, there's only one thing we can control in life, and that is the way that we respond to life's events. So that is how I love to equip my clients. Like, let's just say the things that are coming to our mind. Let's add the value that we add. And if we get a comment from someone who's more senior who thinks it's not appropriate, that's fine. We can choose how we respond and how we deal with that. So I would definitely encourage people to speak up more, and not to be afraid of the consequences, because we can always deal with the consequences. But when you haven't had a voice and you're not speaking up and you're not feeling confident, that's a kind of perpetuating cycle. So for me, it's like, we've got to break that at some point. If you want to accelerate your career, if you want to step into leadership, if you want to grow, if you want to have a growth mindset, if you want to step out of your comfort zone, right? We need to address some of these things that are making us feel afraid. So we might as well start at some point, but have the tools to deal with the fallout or the response, regardless of how that's kind of comes across, or how that's initiated, if that makes sense.
What I hear there a lot is like building an inner resilience, I would say. How do you go about that? Because I think resilience and confidence, again, go kind of hand in hand here. And what I find so funny about confidence is that you need to act before you have it to ever get it, if that makes sense, which is a little bit counterintuitive, but that's what I find helpful, like to go for something even though you don't have all the answers and you have not figured it out completely. But if you never take that first step, you're never going to be that confident leader that you aspire to be.
Yeah, and I love the word resilience. And we know that confidence is a byproduct. So you've so well described it as, we need to start with courage. we have to start by dipping a toe somehow. And it doesn't mean going all out and doing everything all at once. You know, we can kind of climb that ladder. We can start small, we can do small things and then realize, oh, nothing bad happened. And I can either kind of retreat into my comfort zone, or, you know, I can go again, or I can try something different, or I can try something bigger next time. And I think you're absolutely right. It's like it takes a little bit more courage to start. But I think the loop is, you know, we talked about kind of self-perpetuating, you know, in terms of bad habits, but it's also in terms of good habits. So the loop is, you know, we have some courage, we try something. You know, we're never good at something when we start it, right? Everything you're ever proud of, you had to do for the first time once. And that's what I love. It's like, actually, you know what? The more that we try, the better that we get, and the more proud that we are that we tried. And so for me, it's like remembering the things that we did well. I love encouraging my clients to keep a running ta-da list instead of a to-do list. So of all the things that they are really proud of, and remembering that they had to do them for the first time once. They had to step out of their comfort zone. They had to start with courage in order to do that. And, you know, to answer your question, and slightly about resilience, and maybe kind of going slightly off topic, but I think it's all linked, is I think about resilience as almost like, I don't know, like I'd love to hear your take on it as well afterwards, but almost resilience like a bubble. And I think the social media, Amazon Prime world that we live in right now, we almost outsource our resilience, or outsource our measures of success, or we outsource what it is that we think about ourselves. We're outsourcing to the external environment. And I think for me, resilience is almost bringing it back in-house. And it's like recognizing that we're okay regardless of what happens. And it's okay regardless of if someone says something bad about me online, or somebody rejects me, or, you know, those kind of things. And it's like, actually, you know what, I'm going to be okay regardless of what happens, or regardless of whatever external influences. And I think let's stop outsourcing our validity of this world to the likes of other people, and physical likes on our social media post, or, you know, physical acceptance. Yes, I want to work with you, or yes, I want to exchange, you know, some money in exchange for coaching services. Like, that isn't how I'm measuring my success. Right? The measure of success is how resilient I am, and how I'm growing, and how aligned with my values I am. And, you know, I think, you know, actually in today's society, we've forgotten what it means to be resilient and to be successful in terms of what success means to us. We're always comparing ourselves and measuring ourselves to what that means for other people. And I've talked a lot, and I feel like I'd love to hear what you think about kind of resilience.
Love that, yes. And I think we have a very similar view there. I kind of view it as like a holding, like how much can I hold? How much can I be present with unpleasant emotions? How much can I be present with feedback? Like, how much structure can I kind of provide and just be with it? That's kind of my definition of resilience, I would say. And like you said, it's so important that we keep that going, because it gives us so many advantages. Like, resilience can really help us in all areas of life, career, of course, being a big one there. Is there any specific exercise that you like to take people through to kind of be able to hold more? You already touched on the list that I loved. I think we focus so much on the things that we still have to do, or that didn't go right, because our brain kind of has like a negativity bias. So we kind of focus on the stuff that did not go right, but to really celebrate these wins, I think that can really help to build confidence, to build resilience, because we just have evidence now that we did it once. So why wouldn't we do it again?
Yeah, I love the evidence-based approach, and that's definitely how I work. I also really like something I've kind of nicknamed play the tape through. And I think this really helps when you think about kind of what's the worst that can happen. And some people are so paralyzed by fear of judgment, or fear of not living up to expectations, or fear of not being perfect, that we stay stagnant, or we don't take action, or we don't do the thing because we're so afraid of what might happen, or how somebody might perceive us. So I kind of go, actually, let's just kind of play the tape through in our mind. What would happen? What would the worst that would happen could be if you were to take that action and you were to follow it all the way through to the end? let's say there was a job opening and I didn't meet all the criteria, but I really wanted to go for it anyway, and just to see what would happen. And there was a part of me, like maybe my inner critic was like, oh, but you're not qualified enough, but you're up against three guys, but you don't speak French, or whatever it is, like that my inner critic is kind of coming back with me. And I was like, actually, what was the worst that could happen? Yeah, I put myself out there. Okay, I went through the interview process. Maybe I botched the interview. Maybe that's the worst that could happen. Maybe I couldn't answer some questions. Maybe I could. Maybe I got all the way to the end and I didn't get the job. Is that the worst that could happen? And I think sometimes we blow it up in our minds to think, oh gosh, that's awful. That's the worst that can happen. Actually, do you know what? There's so many positives that happened out of that. So instead of what's the worst that could happen, what's the best that could happen? And yeah, obviously the best that could happen is I aced the interview and I got the job, and I beat the guys, and happy days, right? The best, and maybe I doubled my salary, or that kind of thing, right? And I got a nice Mercedes in the driveway, right? Maybe that's the best that could happen. But actually, you know what? There's also some learnings in either scenario, and I think let's not dismiss or stop ourselves from going for something because of that fear of failure. Because actually in that failure, let's say, take the scenario where I didn't get the job, what did I learn about myself? Maybe I learned, actually, I didn't want the job. Maybe I learned I needed to brush up on my interview skills. Maybe I learned more about myself in terms of what I valued in a role that I wouldn't have learned if I hadn't gone for it. So I think, let's maybe detach the outcome from the journey. And I think we're all too quickly want to get to the destination, and we think that life is going to be bright and rosy and rainbows and flowers when we get there. But actually, you know what? There's a whole lot of life in between now and then. And I think for me, it's about how we choose to view the journey and how we choose to enjoy the ride, because there's great views along the way, and there's a lot of people with blinkers on who are missing those views. And there's other people who are open-minded to see, oh, actually there's not only views there, but there's other routes and there's other ways around, and it isn't always as straightforward as we anticipated it to be. And I think sometimes if we just put our blinkers on and think about the end point or the end game, actually we've missed so much of life, and maybe sleptwalk through it along the way. So I know that was you asked me about a tool, but yeah, I kind of went off on a tangent there, as I tend to do, so sorry about that.
We love the tangents, keep them going. And I think that's so important, because the only end goal is kind of death. Like, it's a little bit sad if we always have this goal that we're pushing towards, and it's the next promotion, it's the next job, it's the next car, whatever it is, and we miss that the thing in between is actually our life. So I really enjoy that sentiment of enjoying the view and being happy in the process. I think that is super, super important. And also to understand the learnings that come. Like, even if we did not get the desired outcome, there was a lot of learning in there. And I feel like often when we do this kind of fear setting, or we just like think about the worst scenario, we also understand that it's not a life or death situation. It's not that bad. Like, even if we don't ace the interview, like, there are no real consequences to it. Maybe our ego gets a little bruised, but we can brush that off and recover from that. So I really enjoy how you think about that. If we take it one step back and we kind of think about, okay, I want to build this confidence, I want to build up these leadership skills, often we need kind of a North Star so that we get that bravery to even try, the courage that you talked about. We need to have kind of a goal that's very meaningful to us. And I know that you work a lot around like values and even the direction that people want to go with people to figure that kind of out. Can you talk a little bit about how we can think about our values and kind of develop this North Star that maybe gets us out of our shell and going?
Yeah, Nina, I love talking about values, as you know, and for me, I love the way that you described it as a North Star. It really is the foundation. Whether we're aware of them or not, we still live by our values, and they're very intrinsic to us and very kind of embedded. And for me, I think there's a different schools of thought here, but for me, I don't recognise that values change. I think that you're fundamentally the same as you go through life. Yes, priorities change and different seasons happen, but for me, I think you're generally very like yeah, the foundation of the essence of your values don't really change. And I probably need to do a little bit more research in terms of like at what point they're formed, because I think we don't recognize like from one day to the next, oh, I have a value. But I think when we look back, I've already given away my age, but when I look back to kind of my teen years, I think if I recognised that I held values at that point, it would have even been really beneficial. So I think we have values, but we don't recognise that we have them until much later on in life, and that is something I'd love to address. Is, you know, actually let's think about articulating those values and recognizing what they are. I have an exercise that I do with my clients before we even start working together so that we can really hit the ground running, is to identify their values, with them. And for me, it's always so eye-opening for them, because they're like, oh yeah, that makes so much sense. So values for people who are not familiar with them are essentially like, I can find a way to describe them better than you've already articulated so eloquently, our guiding light, our North Star. They are our fundamental belief system, essentially. And I think we could spend a whole other podcast around nature versus nurture. But essentially, these are, a set of values which are how we make decisions, essentially. And I think as we grow through life, and I say that purposefully because, we're always growing through life. When we grow through life, life gives us different situations and different opportunities and different challenges. And I think, when we understand what our values are, we can always then turn back to our values and go, okay, how am I going to make decisions that are best for me, that are going to be led by my values? And I think that, when we're understanding what our values are, they feel very aligned to us. They feel very comfortable. We are like, oh yes, that's immediately like, you definitely feel like, maybe I'll give some examples because I feel like I'm just dancing around. So some of my values are, so integrity is one of my highest values. Fun is one of my values. Community is a value. Success and leadership are probably my 5 values. I kind of use them interchangeably. Leadership and learning for me go hand in hand, for example, so that kind of growth element. And I think if I'm not living in alignment with my values, I feel stuck. I feel like something isn't quite working. I can go back to my values and go, right, what am I missing? Am I not having enough fun? Am I missing a community element? I work on my own. So, are there some elements that I need to then make sure that I'm bringing back into my life to feel a little bit more aligned and kind of get me unstuck or a little bit unstagnant? And for me, I also like to work with my clients who, I have a client who came to me and she wanted a new job. She actually had tons of job offers. She had 3 job offers and she didn't know where to turn. So I mapped out a matrix with her and we looked at her values across the top, and I asked her some questions around, map out these 3 job opportunities versus your values around, what's the positive experience for me? What's the positive experience for my family? How will I learn? And let's give it scores. And then we literally saw in black and white what the obvious answer was, or the obvious route for her to go down in alignment with her values. And yes, that is a little bit kind of reducing it to something that is a bit black and white. And, for me, I don't prescribe to that. I'm a little bit more, there's also intuition and there's also, feelings involved as well. But I think when it's in black and white, it feels very hard to negate the fact that your values are driving your decision making, or the other way around. If you're stuck and you want to go back to your values, they can provide a whole wealth of information for you that you may have dismissed and gone, actually, let's live a little bit more in alignment to your values. And I think when you're stuck or angry, or there's a feeling or a strong emotion that's come up, for me, I usually find that that's something that's crossed my values and my boundaries. And when I kind of see that or go back to that, I'm like, oh yes, that's exactly why that's happened. And I don't need to get mad about it. I don't need to be angry about it, but it just brings up that element of, understanding why I've had such a reaction to something or someone. And you know what, it's on me, it's my responsibility to choose my response ability, to physically choose that response from the best version of myself. And that's how I try to encourage my clients to look at as well. So yeah, guiding star of values for me is absolutely vital. I feel like I butchered that explanation. How else would you describe values, Nina?
I think you nailed it already. I think that was a really good explanation of like how to go about them. And I think also the examples really help to get an understanding of what we mean by that. And something that I love to do with my clients to either identify values, or if we feel super stuck, try to come back to them, is to look at our calendar and to look at our spending. Because if our calendar is filled with things that are not in alignment with our values, we are probably really unhappy. And if we're spending our money, our energy on stuff that are not in line with our values, we're probably also very unhappy. So how can we put our spending and our time in line with what is really important to us? I think that can make a huge difference when it comes to our inner happiness.
I love that.
If we have kind of identified this North Star, we know our operating system, we know what is important to us, then there are still a lot of things that can hold us back when we now shoot for the stars. There's the inner critic, there's the lack of self-belief. Can you touch a little bit on things that you see very commonly in the women that you work with, and then what do you do to kind of overcome that?
Yeah, we've touched a little bit on the inner critic, and that for me is definitely that kind of the monkey on the shoulder or the elephant in the room for a lot of my clients who are feeling like that lack of self-confidence, lack of self-worth, and lack of self-belief, and that kind of goes deeper sometimes than just when you kind of identify the most confident person in the room, it isn't that they're the most confident. It isn't that they're confident because they're extrovert or because they're loud. And I think that there's a misconception that being confident means that you have to be loud, or that you have to be extroverted, or that you have to be great at networking. For me, I think there's a beautiful definition of confidence, which is just being comfortable in your own skin and, going into those rooms. And it's not about whether people will like you. It's about being okay if they won't, because you actually like yourself. And for me, I think that is the very definition of confidence, rather than being loud and brash. And, I think sometimes we think of confidence being like that, and sometimes it can be, but also those people who are like that are sometimes insecure, and they're finding a way around that. And there's no right or wrong here. There's certainly no judgment. They are feeling more at home or at ease by wearing a mask, and that mask might come across as that they're being uber confident. And you know what? I think that is such a great place to start, is let's not compare ourselves to other people, because we just don't know what they're going through, or what mask they've chosen to wear today, or how they're choosing to show up, or the arguments they might have had this morning, or the sickness that's going on in their family, or whatever it is. Like we can't judge other people because we just don't know their stories. So I think, just bringing it back to ourselves, and this seems to be such a running theme of this lovely conversation, is about kind of just being internal and being comfortable and confident internally, and knowing what we bring to the party, and what we bring to each conversation, or what we bring to our careers, or what we bring to our clients, and just being okay with whatever life throws at us. That resilience piece that you've already kind of touched on. So for me, I think there's this element of let's not compare ourselves, because I think a lot of it can come from comparisonitis, and a lot of it comes from that we're so conditioned to listen to what's the worst that could happen, or the negative voice, or we've touched on that as well. And I think let's also consider what's the best that could happen, and what would happen if I don't speak up, but I've had the best idea in the world. Or those people whose businesses aren't built yet because they aren't brave enough, but yet they've got the best multi-million pound business idea that the world has never seen, and the world may never see, because you aren't brave enough, or bold enough, or courageous enough to make that decision. So I think there's a lot around thought work that I ask my clients to do. Again, even before we start working together, I ask them to kind of keep a track of what thoughts are coming up for them. And, for me, everything is a thinking problem. So everything that you're feeling a lack of or that you're feeling stuck with is a thinking problem. So the thoughts that we think give us our feelings, and the feelings give us our actions, and then the actions, we kind of go around in a loop, and then the actions give us our thoughts again. So actually for me, it's like, let's kind of cut it off at the source. And it does take a lot of practice, because I've already spent 4 decades thinking the same thoughts. So it is like, actually, how do we pattern interrupt? And for me, it's about pattern interrupting and rewiring some of those more negative thoughts, or that inner critic, or that imposter syndrome voice, and giving it a more positive one. And it isn't about exchanging a terrible thought, I'm worthless, for something that we don't believe in, that I'm suddenly worthy. Actually, there's a process that I like to use called ladder thoughts, which is, what is the next best thinking thought? So if I'm thinking about, I am worthy but I don't believe it, what could I believe instead that I do buy into? And for me, this is where I don't love this kind of fake it till you make it. For me, I prefer something like fake it till you become it. So in these ladder thoughts, it's like, okay, how could I just take one step closer to thinking something better? And Gabby Bernstein says it really, really well. She's like, just reach for the next good thinking thought. If you can't reach for that, what could you reach for instead? And that for me is like, it gives me so much hope and so much possibility and opportunity, is that we don't have to believe all the thoughts that we think. We get to decide, we get to choose. And for me, sometimes it's a pattern interrupt, or it's a stop, or it's a, I've thought that now, a couple of times, let's get curious, where's that coming from? And thoughts, this as well as I do, we have 60,000 thoughts every single day. 85% of them are negative. How shocking is that? 95% of those thoughts are the same as yesterday. So we're sleepwalking awake through life, living and thinking and breathing the same negative thoughts every single day. And that's what I talk about, pattern interrupt, and rewiring those thoughts to something a bit more positive. And it's not about toxic positivity. It's not about positivity at any cost. It's not about not feeling feelings. It's about, how can I exchange this thought for a better thinking thought? And that for me is what I love to work on with my clients.
I love that idea of everything is a thinking problem. That is so true. Like, at the root of it, that's what it comes down to. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that is brilliant. And also to not bypass, like, with the affirmation or whatever it might be, but just to one step up the ladder. Like, I really, really enjoy that mental picture as well. I can definitely see how that can help a lot of people who are listening. Is there anything else that we have not yet touched up on that you feel is important to add to this kind of list of limitations, limiting beliefs, holding people back, or maybe something completely different that you just feel we should add before we end?
I think the other thing to mention is to know that it's normal. And you know what, we're here talking about it mainstream because it's so normal, and it's reported that 70% of us will experience some kind of imposter syndrome at some point in our lives, and that is only the people who are willing to admit it. So for me, I think that it's just so normal and it's so natural, and it's nothing to be afraid of or ashamed of. And I think too many people sit in stuckness or stagnation because they are feeling like they ought to be able to fix it themselves, or they ought to be able to, break through, or maybe, this is all that life is. I wanted to share that actually it's so natural and it's so normal to have these thoughts, but it's also so quick and so easy, once you know how, to kind of break free from these thoughts. And as I said, everything's a thinking problem. So, you know what, when you've got someone, a trusted friend, a trusted advisor, a mentor, a coach, whoever that is, who can kind of just shine a light on that, or, hold up a mirror and go, actually, I'm hearing, your language is, quite negative. I'm hearing that you're maybe thinking these thought processes, and we do it so habitually and so automatically that it is it becomes such a habit and such a pattern, but having just someone that you trust just to break that cycle with can be so beneficial. So for me, I think don't suffer in silence would be the thing that I would say is, and don't think that you're unique in this, because we've all been through it. And there's so many people out there who are willing to speak up and share their experiences and share, how they've broken through. And, we met on LinkedIn. And I think for me, if you're looking for any free resources around anything mindset, and you hadn't thought to look on LinkedIn yet, there's a lot of people sharing and some amazing resources and stories and experiences over there. And you'll definitely recognize that you are not alone if you come hang out with us over on LinkedIn. But yeah, reach out for help, and don't suffer for too long, because if you haven't fixed it yourself by now, there's a good chance you're going to sit in it for a bit longer. So you know what, let's get the help that you need, and asking for help is definitely a strength, because it means that you can move through things quicker than sitting on the sidelines of life wishing that you had something different to say. So for me, get help if you've been sort of struggling for a good few months now, because the breakthrough is just around the corner.
So important. And I think we often so strongly believe in our thoughts and identify with them that we don't even really understand that there can be a distance. But then with other thoughts, like for example, if you're driving a car and you are driving, you're just thinking about, or maybe I should just junk into the other lane or whatever. And we understand that that is kind of a stupid thought to have, and that's not me. But then when I think about I'm not worthy, or I can't do this, or I have nothing valuable to say, then for some reason we believe that same weird voice inside our heads. And I love the sentiment of reaching out for help, because I think we understand that for our kind of physical symptoms, we go to a doctor if something is up, but why don't we also get support when it comes to our mind, so our mindset and these more inner workings of the body.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Beth, where can people go if they want to connect with you, if they want to have you as their guide when they're working through these challenges? Where can people find you?
Oh, thanks, Nina. Well, I did touch on LinkedIn because basically I'm obsessed with LinkedIn. So if you're over on LinkedIn, you can come find me, Beth Hocking, Hocking, or visit my website, www.beth-hocking.com.
Awesome. And we're going to have that linked below for everyone who's curious to check you out. And thank you so much for this conversation. It was so much fun.
It was so much fun. I could have talked to you for hours. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, tribe. Thank you so much for watching this episode. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a like and a comment below. There's going to be new episodes dropping every Wednesday, covering everything from entrepreneurship to health, basically giving you all the tools that you need to peak perform in business and in your life. So please make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. This is a one-woman show. There is no network, there are no sponsors, and there is no editing team behind this. So it's up to me and you to spread the word about it. So if you have a friend who might benefit from what you learned today in this episode, please make sure to share a link with them. I see you next Wednesday. Much love.